Greetings to all the students of Khainur University, BBA 7th semester. My name is Imtiaz Sharifi. We would like to conclude on our studies of international business. This is week 3. Technically it's week 4 because I divided week 2 into 2 sessions. So this is week 3. We would like to start off today's subject matter regarding triads. Today's table of content is triads and international business, role of triad, how triads dominate and the concept of FDI, relationship of various triad members and the dominance of Japan within triads. This is our subject for the day. Most of you might be wondering why this slide is here. This is the book that you can download from pdfdrive.com. It's the Geostrategic Triad by Mr. Brzezinski. He was a Russian guy who has written this book, a beautiful book. I have gotten most of my content from this book also, and other books also. I can forward you the book if you want also. Let's just kick start off with our studies. What is BRICS? BRICS, to be honest, was proposed by Jim O'Neill, who was a British economist back in UK. He was also working for Goldman Sachs, which controlled over $800 billion portfolio. So he came up, I think if I'm not mistaken, it was in June 2009, he coined the term BRICS. And BRICS basically originally refers to 4 countries. First of all, it was BRIC. As I mentioned earlier, Jim O'Neill mentioned BRIC, and after 1 year, South Africa came into the picture, which came as BRICS. BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. These are the major players or the major countries that do economies between one another, and with the exceptions of Russia, the BRICS are developing or newly industrialized country. They are distinguished by their fast growing economies and significant influence on regional and global affairs. They all have a big impact with their neighboring countries. Just to give you an example, BRICS countries mostly represent approximately 4 billion people, with a combined nominal GDP of $14.9 trillion. That's a lot of money. Every year they have got appointments like who chairs the whole BRICS committee, and this year India holds the current chair. Next year it could be Russia, following it could be China. In some news and CNN you'll always see the BRICS meeting, and they present an important portfolio or investments or countries, what they sell, what tariff they might hold. So they do all those things in BRICS. As you all know, world trade is always dominated by a small number of nations. Not all the countries in the world play an important part in world trade. Governments of these nations take a lead in international organization, and their companies are responsible for large numbers of trade and investment. Over the last decade, international business activity has increased dramatically, especially among triad nations. That's the whole point, that triad nations contribute to major of this investment and major of this holding of the actual currency or money. Foreign direct investments and trade are at all-time high between all these countries. Most active economies of the EU, to be honest, especially Germany, France and UK, have got the economies up and running. Growing numbers of these countries will become prominent on the international business stage. To be honest, they play a key role in defining what they'll be doing. There's a new term now. It's called the new triad, because as we all know, America is now driving the globalization of India and China. So hence the new triad has formed, and the new triad has formed within US, China and India. They create large sources, they contribute to a growing number of market of food, services and capital. The new triad has become a growth engine for the global economy. All 3 economies are growing in terms of GDP and productivity. India and China are both critical to America's continued economic success. One must not forget China. China is now number one country at this current day that we are talking, and China is moving quickly to establish itself as a major player in the triad. Let's just give you a quick picture of the triads. For example, this is also the new triads. If you look at the US, they control 1/4 of the world economy. They have number one military power, and all they do their multinational exploring in third world countries. Their products, their services, their company tend to explore is the word investment or foreign direct investment into third world countries. The EU, the trade and the commercial alliance, they have got huge. If you look at Singapore, if you look at these airlines, aviation, they all countries can go to one another just by forming a commercial alliance. Europe is highly densited, so there's a high demand for their own product. It's usually when it's confirmed by Europe. Whenever you buy a product, there's a CE sign there, Conformity Europe, which means that the product is confirmed by Europe quality. Hence, there's a high demand for products and it's highly density. It's one of the European Union is top countries. They pull the major of the economy from other countries also. Like it's a good puller of for investments. Look at Japan. No need to mention further of how good they have done in technology innovation, in the robotics, in Sony, in TV and everything. They are very good in importing raw materials and exporting electronics. They're always developing new processes to optimize production through sustainability to profit. There's a key part of Japan. Let's discuss a bit more about Triad. Triad is about 3 interrelated groups. Triad compete in the home country as well as other markets in other countries. The US, Europe were facing recession, and it had an effect in Japan, to be honest, at the time when the huge loss came. It always is linked, so if one country is facing a recession, it automatically hinders the other countries. One must not forget that the US is a main consumer of all these triad countries. So all countries in the triads are net supplier to the US economy, and US as the main consumer. One must not forget that despite the increase of international activity by these countries and other emerging countries, multinational enterprises from Triad will continue to account for most of the world foreign direct investment and trade. This is a link to our previous studies also. This graph will give you a rough example of how countries between the three they sell. I mean, the goods found this map of 1995, but it's similar going on till now also. How much United States export to Europe, how much they export to Japan, and vice versa. There's a big link of Europe exporting to United States $136 billion and to Japan $48 billion. Similarly with US and Japan, they have got a line. It's horizontal, vertical, linked, interrelated. All kinds of things happen in this triad diagram. If you look at the evolution of the triad, I've given you a picture of the 1980s. It was a big 3 companies with the USA, EU, Japan. In 2015, USA always there, EU is there, but BRIC was formed. I mean, BRIC came into the picture. I mean, they were formed in 2009-10, but they became a global player in 2015. Let's look quickly at how things might work out in 2010 versus 2050. If you look at China, China is not being a major power of GDP in 2010. If you look at 2050, they're going to be a huge player. And looking at right now, also Japan is a major country power in terms of economics right now as of today. US is second. To be honest, will be second in a couple of years time, also 30 years of time also. Then India, Brazil, Russia, United Kingdom, Japan, France, Germany, Italy are following up back on. It just gives you an idea of what the future might look, because China will always be number one for the next 30 years as predicted by the OECD graphs, to be honest. This is just give you a quick example again, that FDI by Triad, the US, how much they spend to billions of dollars, the EU to USA, US to Japan, trade among the Triad. These are all figures that I've copied from the internet, how much USA trades to Europe, EU to US. It's an interlink of activities between all these countries. What they do is cars, mobiles, machinery, parts, all kinds of things are traded between each other. Let's just give you a quick example of a case study of how these three countries, for example, Hitachi, you may know them by cars, but they do cameras also, they do machinery parts also. The middle is Japan, which is a maker of constructor equipment. I mean, Hitachi, they make construction equipment. They have got a nice alliance in America. They provide John Deere and Company. They provide them all their parts for their own machinery. But if you look at Fiat in Europe, they provide them all the cars. So they're all interlinked. This is a simple example of how Hitachi takes advantage of its partner distribution network. Again, triads. What we are looking for is the three triads. Example of Walmart. This is the number one retail market in USA, to be honest. It has only 10% of its store outside North America. It's got international plan, to be honest, a huge international plan. It has not been global because they only choose certain countries that can afford their products. It's cheap products, but they look. Walmart has got approximately 4,000 stores around the world. Nearly 3,000 are in US and nearly 1,000 are international in countries like UK and Canada and all these places. They sell and they're interrelated to each other. They sell goods to one another, and that's a fine example of being a Walmart. The auto industry, let's look at the Benz. They bought Chrysler from USA, which formed an acquisition of Daimler Chrysler. Again, fine example of Europe and US. Ford is a US company. They bought Jaguar, they bought Mazda, they bought Rover from BMW. Ford US, and all these other companies are Europe. So they have this interlinked community in terms of buying, acquisition, and trading off, selling these products between one another. GM, General Motors, bought Lotus and Saab, and they own a 48% share in Isuzu. That's a Japanese car maker. Let's just look at another example. Renault is also a car maker. They sold its truck division to Volvo. Volvo is again US. They bought Samsung Motors. It's not mobiles, it's motors. And gain of operation control of Nissan. This is like European companies having foreign direct investment in countries like Japan. Trade economies, triad economies again. This just gives you the idea that the trade nations dominate the world and investment, and a great deal of this activity take place within the triad nations. For example, the US and Japan do approximately 210 billion worth of trade annually. The EU and US, they do over 380 billion dollars worth of trade annually, and the EU and Japan do 120. This is just old figures, but these numbers have gone up based on these are 5 years old numbers, but they could have gone up and down. So one of the major area of trade is the automobiles, which provides an excellent example of economics interrelationship that exists between the trade companies. I mean, if I come to the US auto industry, they have got a production of 16 to 18 million cars per year. The major players are GM, Ford, Chrysler, Volkswagen, Honda. US industry, all these cars are, to be honest, European. They're Japanese cars doing in the EU. If you look at the European companies, they have their own companies like the BMW, Mercedes, Porsche, but EU companies are now mostly concentrating on quality. That's why they have got more products coming from Japan and US, predominantly on sporty cars. Let's look at the Japan automakers. I mean, Japanese cars are always based on quality. They have got the Lexus, they have got the Infiniti, they are luxury cars. Just now, Cadillac and Lincoln are coming from US to Japan, but not much sold there also. But the market penetration has happened. Even Japan has got a huge volume of cars coming from European countries, the BMW and Mercedes cars. Let's look at if you look at the number of cars, 100 cars in 2010, why it's so good to look at the Toyota, the Honda, the Nissan, these are all how many problems they have in a car. At the if you look at the whole car problem, Japanese cars tend to have 115 problems, then Honda, then Nissan, then GM. They all have their operations mostly in Japan, but it just shows the quality. They have got fewer quality problems. The rest, like if you look at Ford, they have got 160. When a person drives a car for the period of its lifetime expiry, they tend to have 115 problems with the car. So Toyota falls number 1 in terms of having the least number of problems with the car. Again, we go back. Why I'm giving this car example is because a lot of the trades are happening between EU, Japan through the automotive industry. So if you look at the automotive of the EU, they took the following decision to enter the US market. I mean, how do we fully benchmark or set the barriers of entry into US market? They basically base their production in US. They reduce the time to market their brands. They customize their cars into reliability and comfort, and they spent more on research and development, on technical innovation and quality workmanship. How does the Japanese? They also hold a strong presence, to be honest, in the US car industry. They're hybrid cars. Hybrid cars are those cars which run on battery. They're less fuel consumption. They are environment friendly. They have gained more acceptance in the US. Japan was a leading car in terms of this hybrid. They charge their batteries, they have concentrated on the economy as well. They were expensive cars, Japanese, but they're trying to bring their price a bit lower so they can compete in US. Big cars are quite famous in US, mostly trucks. So Japanese are focusing more on how to make trucks so they can penetrate the US market. Again, we have gone into the auto industry. Like if you look at 16 million, the EU is also has 16 million vehicle industry per year. Germany, France, Italy, Belgium account for more or half of its share. Like they contribute from cars come from France, Germany into Europe. Major competition between themselves are European, because the Volkswagen, Fiat, Peugeot are all renowned brands. The US and Japanese are not major players in Europe. Two things: one, it's they're too far away; B, the tariff reasons; B, the transportation, the cost. They kind of make the car much more expensive. Not to say that Japanese and US cars are not there, but they're not a major players. They're not, everybody is not buying Japanese and US cars in Europe. They have got their own hundreds different types of brands that they can choose from, models and brands. What about Ford's strategy? Ford is a US car. How they entered European, I mean, how the strategy that they had to market their cars to the European part. Volkswagen had bought Rolls-Royce and Lamborghini. They are very famous sporty car, luxury car, expensive cars, so Europeans tend to buy a bit of that. General Motors, they bought Saab. Saab is also a very comfortable car, a very posh car, so they wanted to lure the consumers into the European market so they could enjoy more of the Saab effect. Ford and GM, they were capturing more European market through acquisitions and mergers. That's the whole point. If you can't beat them, you have to join them. And how do you join them? You buy them. US car makers have opted to manufacture smaller cars. Americans, everything is big. The McDonald's is big, the popcorns are big, the food are big, people are big, cars are big. European are much more tend to be smaller. They're a bit more fitter. So European people tend to like smaller cars, not like US where all their cars must be big, trunky, and full of truck type. We did a bit of study in our previous session of foreign direct investment, but this is just to add some more weight to our studies. Foreign direct investment, as you're aware, is the ownership and control of foreign assets. When you go to one country, you buy all their products or you invest in part of it. That's called foreign direct investment. In practice, foreign direct investment usually involves the ownership, whole, partial of a company, This is called foreign subsidiary. I mean, you are the owner, or you could buy shares in there, or you can buy some partial ownership of it. That's FDI sets up overseas operation as a joint venture or totally owned enterprise. They provide the investing company with an opportunity to manage and control foreign firm activities. While the objective of portfolio investment is to achieve growth, the value of his financial holding. I mean, the whole point is when a company comes from another foreign countries, they expect the company to grow, they expect the company to have more value in there, all these things. Most important of all, they take an ownership, the position, like they are the owners, and they also gain control of the foreign assets. This is FDI. FDI, other profits are all basically they to increase sales and profit. I mean, it's simple. Multinational companies earn millions of dollars each year through overseas sales. Companies in smaller, they need to if big companies tend to invest big, then smaller companies are forced to look outside beyond their home, so they also have to diversify their portfolio. A fine example of Nestle: 90% of Nestle assets are sold outside. They could be chocolates, they could be milk, they could be cream, they could be cheese, they could be biscuits, anything. Nestle coffee is most important. Another fine example of over 50% of Royal Dutch Shell, that's the fuel supplier of Dutch company, they sell it outside their home market. They do have their sales inside Dutch, but they do nowadays smaller firms, they have realized that they can earn bulk of their revenue for international consumer. Fine example is internet. I mean, most of their companies are set up in one country, in India, but they do sales through all over the world. Some international markets are growing much faster than the others, some due to limitation, due to laws, that's the reason that some companies tend to grow slower. Foreign direct investments, they provide multinational enterprises with the opportunity to take advantages of all the above opportunities. Again, a slide we're going to from the previous slides. SMEs, small medium enterprises, also find that the growth of large multinationals, there's often a need for local suppliers, and if they do well, there's a good chance that the multinational enterprise will extend the contract and allow them to supply other worldwide locations. It's a huge win-win situation for small companies, because if they join hands with MNEs, they could become supplier for them and they could bring in huge revenue towards them. The global markets offer lucrative opportunities in domestic market. Lucrative means more money, more stylish in terms of wealth, more in terms of if you have a product and it's being sold into a global market, it's only fair to say that the value of your own company is going to be doubled or triple. I mean, this explains why Coca-Cola and IBM earns more sales and revenue overseas than they do in US. Like if you look at Coca-Cola, all around the world they're selling, but they're selling it approximately 70%, 80% more outside than they're doing it at US. IBM, a famous chip maker, I mean, all the computers around the world are using IBM. I mean, the idea came in US, but they went multinational, they went to small companies, big companies, they're all earning more outside of their own country. And if you look at Pepsi, PepsiCo, they became Mexico's largest consumer. For an example, Pepsi is also a US product, and now they're selling it to Mexico. Nippon is like a battery electronic company. Their revenue comes 83% of it comes from over. If you look at Toyota sales in Japan, more than 50% of it comes abroad. Why I'm giving you all these examples is to think that globalization, multinational, they tend to make money more than if you look at China, in the last couple of years, China economy had grown at an annual rate of 7 to 8%. Why? I mean, I can ask this question to all of my students watching this program. Countries that move forward towards a market-driven economy, a multinational enterprise are likely to find a huge demand for goods and services that cannot be justified by local firms alone. It means that some companies, there are some products that cannot be bought at home, but when those companies come from outside, they can justify the needs and hunger for that market. Another important point is reduction of cost. If you look at an M&E, they can sometimes achieve sustainability. Sustainability is done by lowering cost or by going abroad than by producing at home. If labor expenses are high and represent a bigger portion of the overall cost, then M&E may be advised to look at other countries that can be good to produce at a much more labor price. One must also look at materials. If materials in the short supply, they must be conveyed through a long distance. It may be cheap to move production close to the source of supply than to import the materials. In most products, in most cases, if you are importing so much raw materials from one country, then companies tend to set up the whole company in that country. It saves time, it saves resources, it saves manpower. I think you are in the business of making money. If the domestic cost of energy for making the product is high, then the company may be forced to set up operation overseas near the source of cheaper energy. One must look at the transportation cost. The Chinese textile firm had gained a major share in the US market. Production costs were so low that after adding in transportation expenses, they were able to beat the competitors. Mexican firms, they had the latest technology. Now they can produce high quality, low cost textiles that can be quickly shipped to US customers. Again, a fine example of using the M&E mechanism. The US now buys more textiles from Mexico than from China. They protect domestic markets. Most M&Es are entering international market in order to attack potential competitors and thus prevent them from expanding their operation overseas. These multinationals are the reason that a competitor is likely to enter a foreign market when it's busy defending its home market position. Sometimes an M&E will enter a foreign market in order to bring pressure on a company that has already challenged its home market. For example, 10 days after Fuji began building its first manufacturing facility in the US, Kodak is announced to open a manufacturing plant in Japan. Both are picture-taking cameras. I mean, they have to look to what their competitors are doing, and they are called mutual forbearance. Then they are not attacking each other, but they're aligning their resources to how to make better profit at the same time. British Petroleum is a huge company of fuel. They merged with Amoco. They assured that through of a solid market share, they try to protect the investment in this foreign market. I mean, the local competitors had to were degraded from its position because BP emerged with Amoco as, I think, a Mexican plant of fuel, and they got the major share of fuel supply. Then all the local competitors went bust, to be honest. Conclusion. Goldman Sachs is the number one bank in US in terms of portfolio managers and everything. They said that India and China will dominate the economy in 2050, forming the new triad. One must say that China are leading the way right now also. The old triads will still remain for a few years. The demand for US, EU and Japan will remain level. The BRICS and new triad will take over from 2020. Until 2050, the BRICS GDP will be twice as big as G7. The G7 countries, which also are major players in the world. China, Korea and India are emerging as powerful economies and have almost taken a place from two of the world economy leaders. One must not forget that some of the triad nations are showing a downfall. America sustains its leadership in world economy. China can be considered as the new lead in the coming years. I think it's true. This slide is from last year. I think America has been hit with the economic and they're sending a multi-trillion-dollar stimulus package to its people. But China have already gained momentum as being the number one source. Thank you very much for your time, and if you have any questions, please do not forget to ask me in the class through the WhatsApp message. Okay, once again, thank you very much for your support.